Well, hello, Midland Online Academy students. It's been a hot minute because we've had a cold week, but we are back and up and running. So let's look at our daily agenda. It says I could summarize the early roots of the women's rights movement by responding to a um, primary source reading. Actually, we're going to change that to a secondary source. I'll edit that in a minute. We're going to respond to a secondary source reading, which has some primary quotes in it. And we're going to take notes on our digital interactive notebook, which, by the way, was originally due last Friday, but we were off school. So obviously, I'm going to give you more time on that. Hopping over to the classwork tab, we see our attendance, and then we also see a new Google form assignment. We'll get to that in a moment. And we see our digital interactive notebook, which has now been pushed to being due this Thursday at midnight. Really, I'm going to give you till Thursday night. Some of you have already turned it in. Hopefully, you did the notes right. But let's go ahead and open up our notes. And we don't want to be there yet. And let's open up our notebook. So on the notebook, we're going to scroll down here. We're going to look at our slides on women's rights. So just sort of review where we've been through the whole unit. And by the way, also to go over the pages that you should have done by now. If you don't, you need to catch up. We've talked about new inventions, and we talked about how those impact the North, the South, and the West all differently. And so these technological innovations lead to economic innovations, and they lead to new ways of thinking. And so we've talked about changes in America's religion and philosophy. We talked about the artistic movements, Romanticism, Transcendentalism, the Hudson River School. And then we talked about these different reform movements. What are we going to do about prisons and education and safe workplaces and the temperance movement? Now, all of that leads us up to the two big civil rights issues that people in the 1800s started to grapple with. And that is women's rights and the fight to end slavery. So today we're going to talk about women's rights. Tomorrow we will talk about abolitionism, the fight to end slavery, which means we're going to start with this page. So you want page 19 in your digital interactive notebook open, and we're going to go down on our slideshow until we find slide 42, which is our first slide on women's rights. So these are the notes that go here, okay, on this top part. You'll notice that the images on my notes page correspond to where you're taking notes in the interactive notebook. We've been doing this the whole unit. So in the 1800s, women did not have what we call suffrage. That doesn't mean suffering. They're words that sound the same but don't share the same meaning. Technical word for that, impress your English teacher, is a homophone. Two words that sound the same. Homo means same, phone means sound, but they don't mean the same thing. Like TWO means the number two, but TOO means also, right? So they sound the same, but they don't mean the same. Same thing here. Suffrage means the right to vote. Another word you'll hear about this is the franchise, which is another way of describing the right to vote. You'll hear that much more in U.S. History Part 2 in high school. Um, but in addition to not being able to vote, women had some other problems. They were denied property rights. Women were not allowed to own houses or businesses, or at least if they were allowed to own them, they had to have a male relative, their husband, their father, their brother, whoever, actually had legal power over that as well. So women had no property rights or very limited property rights, depending on the state. They had very little to no access to education. Some states would let girls go to school through elementary school, but not high school or college. Some states didn't send girls to school at all. Most, even private schools and universities, often turned women down beyond the fifth or sixth grade. They didn't have the right to employment opportunities. There were a lot of jobs that women just weren't allowed to do. And when they could get a job, they didn't have fair wages. And if you were a married woman, you were considered the property of your husband. Not an equal partner in a contract, which is how we view marriage today, but as property. That's why at a wedding ceremony, the father gives the bride to the groom. There's the sense that a married woman did not belong to herself. And this led to a lot of problems like violence in the home, or if a woman managed to earn money or maybe inherited money, they had wealthy parents, the parents die, her husband could just take her money. Nothing she could do. So those are big issues that women were facing in the 1800s. So now we're going to move to the bottom of this page. What did the women do about it? Well, they began to organize and they began to protest. And one of the big things they did was they hold a convention in Seneca Falls, New York. Now, notice our map. Seneca Falls is this green dot here. It's along the Erie Canal. So we know that with the canal zone, we have new businesses popping up along the way, including businesses that hired women, although women were not being treated fairly in the workplace. And so you had these women who got a taste of independence in the workplace, but also were facing injustices. And as these women grow up, so we talked about the Lowell Mills a couple of weeks ago. You read a reading where that young Lowell, Massachusetts, by the way, that would be right around here, not that far from Seneca Falls, where that young girl, Mary Paul, was working and sending the letter to her dad. Well, the Mary Pauls of the 1820s are now grown adult women. And they've had this experience, and they now want to start moving things forward. So they have this convention called the Seneca Falls Women's Rights Convention, and they write a document called the Declaration of Sentiments. And it borrows language from the Declaration of Independence with a few differences. One of them being in the Statement of Rights. Our Declaration famously said, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." That is the statement of belief that launched the United States to declare its independence from Great Britain. Well, the women of Seneca Falls borrow that sentence with a slight modification. "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." So it is a statement that the women of America are now going to begin to demand the same rights that men in America, or at least landowning white men in America, had claimed in the founding of our nation. So this is that expansion of liberty that we've talked about several times through the year. And so this convention is one of many in the time period, but it's the first, and it's pretty big, and it's significant because this gives women all around the United States, especially in the North and to a degree in the West, not so much in the South, to begin to stand up for themselves. Eventually, this is going to culminate in the 1920s with the 19th Amendment that grants women the right to vote in America, something that took a long time. Okay, so by now with these two slides, you've done this whole page. The next page, I just give you some pictures of some women, and we're going to want to be able to name them. So here they are. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, she is the primary writer. I need to reformat this slide. This is Susan B. Anthony, not Ant, but Anthony. So Anthony. Lucretia Mott, Emma Willard, and then Sojourner Truth. And we're going to talk about Sister Sojourner tomorrow as well as an abolitionist. But I do want to say that many of these women who get involved in standing up for their own rights also get involved in the fight against slavery because they begin to feel a sense of sympathy and even a bond with slaves in the South because they realize that as bad as women in the North had it at this point, slaves in the South were in even worse condition. And so while they stand up for themselves, they also begin to stand up for other people as well. So that's all the notes for today. Your Google form takes you to this particular reading, and you guys know the drill on here. And so it's going to walk you through some of these same ideas we talked about. It's going to talk about some of the same women we've just talked about. It takes all the way back to Abigail Adams. And remember that letter that we read way back when she told John Adams that they need to remember the ladies when they write our new government, which we did not do. thus the inclusion of the 14th Amendment. So you know what to do now. You know the drill. And I will drop a fresh video tomorrow. Have a great day, guys. Email if you have questions.